Hey, this is Nahaz, and I wanted to make a quick video here about my predictions for the Shanghai Qualifiers, along with a recap of some of the things that we saw in the Open Quals of the past several days. Ideally, I had meant to get this out last night, but teaching and 2-year-old were not cooperative, so I'm going to cheat a little bit and actually give you my predictions after today's games have already started. I actually haven't looked at all the results, so I'm not cheating as badly as I could be, but moving on. So the Open Qualifiers, biggest thing I wanted to say about this is a big shout out to Faceit. I think they handled these really well. You look at the number of games played over the last 4 days, this is like 8,000 matches. And unfortunately, a lot of the time when we see things about Faceit on Reddit, it's when something has gone wrong with one of the games and somebody feels slighted by an admin decision or something of that nature. I think when you compare the number of Reddit drama threads to 8,000, that number is really stunningly low. I said this after the Frankfurt Qualifiers, and I'll say it again here. I think they did a really good job, and in this kind of a situation, I think no one's going to agree with every decision, and I think the most that you can do is be timely and transparent with the community about these admin decisions that will ultimately come up. And I think they did that, and they're to be commended for how these qualifiers went. A little bit of the statistical oddities. So I've had some conversations over the last few days about people looking at 6.86 match stats and Shanghai Qual stats. 98% of the games in the Open Qualifiers were second pick Radiant versus first pick Dire. And the thing that really sticks out if you look is that Radiant had almost a 70% win rate. I asked the Faceit admins about this. This was actually due to the Faceit client. In auto-hosted matches, in the bot-hosted matches, the Faceit client will automatically give Radiant to the higher seeded team. So they have their own internal seeding system based on individual players' performance in past events in the Faceit system. It's actually pretty good from what I can tell. I'm still a little bit dubious of any seeding system that isn't publicly available, but I think that's kind of beside the point here. The statistics are highly skewed because most of the favored teams were given the Radiant side. I've pushed them for the next event. I think that the choice of picker side should probably be randomized. I've actually had this conversation with a number of tournament organizers over the past couple of years. I think it should for Dota 2 almost always be as it is in the NFL, where you have a coin toss before the match. The winner of the coin toss gets to choose either first or second pick or Radiant or Dire, and then the other team chooses the other. So I'm not a fan of any kind of automatic seeding system here, but again, I don't think it has a huge impact. It's not a big deal. I still will say, though, as I said in my original 6.86 preview video, I expect 6.86 to be very Dire favored at the highest level when the meta settles down a little bit. I want to emphasize, because I'm going to make a few comments about hero selections and some of the overall statistics from the qualifiers, we still know very, very little about the 6.86 meta, and that's partly why I'm looking so forward to the Star Ladder 13 finals here coming up in a few days after the quals are over. I think that's the first time that we're going to see the top teams really play in 6.86 and get a feel for which heroes are powerful and which strats are really going to be coming back. So here, for what they're worth, are the 13 most picked heroes in the Open Qualifiers. Really not too many surprises here that I can see. Maybe Dark's here, a bit of a surprise, but even that, not really. If you look, 6 out of the top 12 heroes here have 57% win rates or higher, and given the number of matches that we're seeing in red, that's pretty significant. These would all be statistically different from 0.5. It's pretty unsurprising. Again, when you start looking at Open Qualifier data, you get a lot of things that are skewed by lopsided games. You get many more very lopsided matchups in these Open Qualifier games than you would ordinarily see in pro-level Dota matchups. So I think a lot of this is just because better teams are able to punish weaker teams with certain heroes. The real thing, honestly, that stands out to me about this is Earthshaker, just with this horrible 38% win rate, despite being the 6th most picked hero. I think that's actually most likely due to the offlane meta. Again, I mentioned in my earlier 6.86 preview video that I thought the offlane meta was going to open up substantially in this path. Earthshaker is just not nearly as well equipped to take advantage of some of the offlane friendly changes in 6.86 when you compare him to some of these other heroes like Tusk and maybe even Abaddon. I also think you might be starting to see the impact of the Slardar and Dazzle vision nerfs with the 44% win rate on Dazzle and the 48% win rate on Slaughter. But again, it's sort of hard to tell that solely from this data. Tusk had a very good win rate. It is worth noting that I believe this was just yesterday, but in the most recent update, they did go ahead and nerf Ice Shard, Sprout, etc. pulling. So a lot of these crazy pulls that you were seeing where Tusk, for example, would pull the Radiant Scion Ancients down past the top tier 1 tower using Ice Shards to prevent the Ancients pathing back up the ramp. That's no longer possible. The creep interactions with spells like Ice Shard and Sprout, this was again something that I mentioned in my preview of 6.86 that I thought would be changed. Those have been changed to interact like they do with Earthshaker's Fissure, where the creeps, if they can't proceed back to their spawn point, or they can't proceed forward in the lane, they just kind of stand there. All right. Invoker also does look to me to still be pretty strong post Alacrity nerf. It's going to be interesting to me the next few days in the qualifiers and then in Star Ladder to see whether that early Exort build reverts back into early Forge Spirits, or whether we still see Alacrity used in lane as an Invoker player myself. Okay, so highest win rate heroes. My slides are a little bit sluggish here. So really most notable of this was Chen. I thought Chen was hugely buffed in this pass, Enchantress as well. He just was dynamite in these qualifiers. He was 82 and 22 across all 4 regions of the Open Qualifiers. I think if you look at a lot of these heroes with the gaudy win rates, IO is probably obvious. Again, one of the things that separates really good teams from lower skill teams is overall map awareness and the ability to control various parts of the map at key points in the match. IO, therefore, always going to be a little bit of a snowball or a stomp hero. But I think otherwise, the theme in this list that you're seeing early aggression and you're seeing pushing strategies and maybe even split pushing coming back. I think Lone Druid is really, really good in terms of his potential. I still question a little bit, where is he going to lane? I don't necessarily know that he's going to be an offlaner. I think he comes online a little bit late in general to be a safe laner. There are a couple people that I respect that have told me that he might actually end up being a mid, but I think provided we can see some stable lane configurations built around him at high level play, he's going to be really good. Beastmaster and Vengeful Spirit were the other 2 heroes that I saw in these Open Qualifiers and really said, wow, these heroes look really powerful now, and I think they're going to be really good even in high level pro play. So the Open Qualifier winners, just to recap very briefly. In the EU, we saw Mama's Boys, that's X4CNL, that's PyCat, Bambo, and the rest. This is a very good team. We'll talk a little bit briefly during my EU qualifier predictions. I think this team has the potential to make noise in the main qualifier as well. Remember that 4CNL competed in the Frankfurt qualifiers as well. The London Conspiracy team, this is an interesting team to me as well. Obviously, I'm familiar, and a lot of people are familiar with Baby Knight on this roster, who left the original Dota for StarCraft and has recently come back. This could very well be a breakthrough performance for him. And I had occasion to actually speak with the LC, one of the LC owners, I believe it was, at Frankfurt. They were really excited about this squad. They had signed them pretty recently before Frankfurt. Really thought that they had a lot of potential going forward. So I don't necessarily know that this is going to be their event quite yet, but this is a squad to keep an eye on going forward. SEA, obviously, I was thrilled to see Winter. Everybody, I think, that has interacted with Winter in the Pro Dota scene over the last year or so has been super impressed with him and his insight. I was really glad to see his team get through and him have a chance to play in the main regional qualifiers. I mean, Isera and Ketchigimba in particular, they're really good players. This team could win a few games in the regional quals as well. Extremist, that was the side of the bracket that was pretty upset prone. I don't really know what to say about them. I'm not familiar with their players. In China, you saw CDEC Avenger come through. They're a little bit of a dark horse team again. The Chinese qualifier number 1 was a little bit like the SEA qualifier number 2. There were a lot of upsets in the bracket. I don't necessarily know that CDEC Avenger is going to do too much in the regionals, although I think they might catch a few people by surprise. Their playstyle seems to be pretty unique. Tongfu, on the other hand, is a really legit team. When you look at the names on this roster, Kabu and UU9 played on the old Tongfu, of course, alongside Old Chicken, who's now with eHome. Faith, of course, is a name that all fans of Eastern Dota will know. This squad's extremely legit, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them make noise in the main qualifier. In the Americas, Team Freedom, IX Mike's squad came through in the first Open Qualifier. I thought they played really, really well. Sunby is a player in particular that gets out of position a lot, can be very inconsistent. Francis as well. But both of those players, when they're playing well and making good decisions, are very, very good core players. And I actually like G-Bay's steadiness at support. I think this team, unfortunately, the NA qualifiers are a little bit lopsided, but I like this team's potential going forward. And of course, Elite Wolves, I would actually have been really devastated for them. They made the finals of both of the two Open Qualifiers. It was very, very close. They edged out Team Unknown, the team that qualified for Frankfurt, of course, in the second one, and I was very happy to see them make it after winning all those games. I want to do a couple shout-outs here, too. First of all, thanks so much to the people that actually cast these games. I know OD Pixel did quite a few of them. Mott did a great job with a lot of the NA games. Grant actually, when that guy stops trolling and seriously cast, I was very impressed with his casting. I'd like to hear more of him alongside maybe some co-casters. And of course, Toby did a couple of casual casts, and other folks here and there did a lot of these qualifier games. And I really enjoyed watching these games. I hope to see Valve provide a little bit more support for people that want to broadcast these games in the future. I thought they were a lot of fun to watch. And of course, the story of the Open Quals for me was Veggie Esports. They were just a ton of fun to watch. Ben Merlini Wu played just, it was police brutality. He played out of his mind in a lot of these games. Purge played an excellent Ancient Apparition and Vengeful Spirit. I thought Cap was not happy with his own performance, I know, but I thought he played an excellent Abaddon and Tusk. Those games were just a ton of fun to watch, and I wonder if you'll see more of Munib going forward. I thought he was a pretty solid player, and I think he could play on a lot of NA teams. So here are going to be the main qualifiers. We'll talk a little bit about the format first. Like TI5 and Frankfurt, it's going to be the same 2 5-team groups, round robin play in the group phase. Top 2 in each group are going to advance to the playoff bracket, and it's GSL style with those 4 teams in the playoff. Basically, all GSL style means is that you need to win 2 games before you lose 2 games. Otherwise, or win 2 matches, because these are going to be best of 3s more precisely, before you lose 2 matches to avoid going home. So that means you win your first 2 matches, you win first 2 best of 3s in the playoff bracket, and you're in. The big difference relative to what we've seen in the past is that they've dropped this 3-1-0 scoring system for the group phase. So previously in the group phase, if you 2-0'd a team, you got 3 points. If you drew 1-1, you got 1 point. You lost OT, you get 0 points. I think this is a really good change. In retrospect, I thought the 3-1-0 system might work pretty well. It's a system that's used extensively in different leagues in soccer or football, if you're not American like me. But the more I thought about this, the more I disliked it. The problem, guys, is that Dota is inherently a best of 3 game. This is something that I didn't necessarily buy into before I started going to a lot of LAN events, but best of 3s in Dota are just so much more indicative of teams' relative strengths than best of 1 play. And what happened with that 3-1-0 system, it actually ended up, to me, putting even more emphasis on individual match results, because no matter what team, all right, won the first game of that 2-game set, you would always see there being 2 points on the line in that second individual game. And so I actually think that takes you even farther away from a best of 3 system. A best of 3 system for the group phase, fine. It's probably not logistically feasible just due to game times and due to the variable length of each series. I understand that, but I think the 3-1-0 system was actually much closer to just straight up best of 1 play than the 2-game sets with just 1 point per game. So I like this change a lot. And by the way, as in this slide and some subsequent slides, I'm shamelessly stealing graphics from Liquipedia here, so shout out to them. So here's the EU qualifiers. Group A here, very, very tough to predict. I think Empire and Team Spirit probably the favorites in this, but I think that there's a lot of room for uncertainty here. I really actually think 4CNL could sneak into the top 2 out of this group. I like the way that they've been playing. Again, they've got Pycat on that roster. They've got Bambo. I like Yapsor a lot. I think he's a very talented, a very smart player. Saska, their other sport, is actually, I believe, an 8K player and just has made some sick plays during the qualifiers. So I like that team a lot. I like their potential. Again, you can never write off Navi either. I don't think Hellraisers are going to do much in this group, but this to me is one of the hardest groups to call in the four regions. Group B, on the other hand, I think is pretty cut and dried. I think Liquid's going to win this group. I think they're going to go on and win the EU qualifier. I won't say fairly easily, but I think that they're the pretty clear favorites. Vega looks like the most likely pick to me to be number 2, but they've been very inconsistent lately. If I had to pick somebody other than Vega, it would probably be Elements. This London Conspiracy squad, again, I think they do have some potential going forward, but I don't think they're ready quite yet to compete on this level. So I would pick Liquid and Empire coming out of this region. Of the two, Empire's obviously the one that I'd be more uncertain about. I wouldn't be surprised to see Spirit or Mama's Boys or even Na'Vi come out of Group A and maybe challenge for that second spot. And Liquid and Vega is actually, if I had to pick something other than Liquid and Empire, it would probably be Liquid and Vega. Okay, in China, Group A, I think, is absolutely the group of death. This, to me, if I had to pick one group out of all four regions that I did not want to play in, even more so than Group B in EU, it would be this one. You've got LGD, you've got IG, and you've got a Tong Fu team that came out of those open qualifiers, has Kabu, UUU9, and Faith. These guys are a really good team. I have to take LGD and IG out of this group, but I would not be surprised at all to see this Tong Fu team make some serious noise. Group B is by contrast, is kind of a meh group for me. I think newbies should be the clear favorites in this group just by experience alone. The second team is a total toss-up, and I'm actually going to go ahead and take CDEC Young. I like Inflame, June, and Icy. They did 2-0 IG here fairly recently. I think that's a pretty good roster, but I would not be surprised at all to see one of the other teams in this group rise up and take that other slot. I'm going to go with LGD and IG out of this region, even if they're the same group. If I had to, you probably could talk me into replacing IG with Tong Fu or maybe even CDEC Young. None of the other teams in this region really stand out to me. But again, with so much parity in Group B, I think the table is set for some really interesting upsets. In SEA, so I mean, it's SEA Dota, naturally going to be very hard to predict. Mineski should probably finish number 1 in Group A. I think this is a very strong team. I really have to ask, I've actually liked First Departure for quite a while. I think Miracle is, Miracle with an E, this being, is one heck of a player. TNC was kind of the consensus, I think, pick for number 2 early on. A lot of people, including Durka, that I know that follow SEA pretty closely, had liked this team for quite some time. I actually think First Departure might finally break out, but again, if I'd have made these picks before the game started, I probably would have gone with TNC in deference to some people that know SEA a little better than I do. In Group B, again, I'm going to be really interested to see how Winter's team does. They've got a solid roster. I mean, they've got some players in addition to Winter. I believe they've got Ysera on that team as well. I think they should do okay. Fnatic and MVP Phoenix are probably the picks here, even though Fnatic has really just not played at all recently, and MVP Phoenix are competing without March. I think it's hard to go against these teams that have this much in the way of international LAN experience, but this is the group where I kind of throw up my hands and say it's SEA Dota. You can never really know. I think if I had to, I'd pick Mineski and probably Fnatic. It would not surprise me to see MVP Phoenix. It wouldn't even really surprise me to see Winter rise up and make it an MVP sweep, make it a Mineski sweep here. Again, it's SEA Dota. I think if you bet on these games, you're a little bit crazy. Finally, in North America, I think this is the most straightforward of the 4 qualifiers. DC should be heavily favored in Group 1. Complexity should be heavily favored in Group 2. I actually really like Archon due to leadership. They've got Fluff and Stuff. They've got, gosh, who's their other support player? I'm blanking on that right now, but they've got a nice stable roster. I really would love to see Leviathan finally break out. Leviathan were very, very close to qualifying for the Frankfurt playoffs. They lost to Unknown in a tiebreaker game where there was a little bit of confusion there. So I actually would really love to see Leviathan make it. I think if you made me choose between them, I'd take either Archon or maybe even Elite Wolves in this group. Remember, that's not today. That's X not today. That's Smash's team. But I think it's DC, and I guess if I had to pick one, I'd pick Archon, but Leviathan or Elite Wolves wouldn't surprise me. Group B, again, same story. Complexity is heavily favored. I really like the potential of this Shazam team. This is basically the XC9 roster with Mason in place of 1437. Obviously, the question is how are they gonna replace Thebon's leadership? But they certainly have the talent of that roster. It's actually unclear to me. There have been some tweets in the last couple days where I thought Ush was kicked from Power of Friendship, and now, based on some of the tweets, I think he might be playing again. I'm not sure. If Ush ends up playing for POF, I think they have a shot in this group. But again, it's very difficult to call any team outside of Complexity. I think really any of these teams outside of Complexity could take the number 2 slot. I'm going to take DC and Complexity, though, coming out of this region. Anything else would be a big upset. This is not the Digital Chaos team that played in the Frankfurt qualifiers. They are much better. They're much more stable. I think they're much more confident. I actually can see them winning a couple of games in Shanghai as well. I think they acquitted themselves quite nicely at the summit in particular. So that's my outlook for the Dota 2 Shanghai regionals, guys. I think these are going to be a lot of fun games. I'm really hyped, so please go tune in to BTS, go tune in to Moonduck, and have fun watching some great Dota.